Malcolm Carter stepped out of his modest SUV, the late afternoon sun of Scottsdale, Arizona, glinting off the polished luxury cars in the dealership's lot. His attire, a simple grey hoodie, worn jeans and sneakers, was far from what one might expect of a man with his status. But this was no accident. Malcolm had recently acquired the prestigious dealership and decided to drop by unannounced, blending in as an ordinary customer. He wanted to witness the true face of his business, a candid look at how customers were treated when no one knew the new owner was watching. As he walked through the glass doors of the showroom, the air-conditioned space and the scent of leather enveloped him. Employees exchanged fleeting glances at him, their eyes betraying curiosity and doubt. Malcolm's quiet resolve never wavered. Today, he was here not as the boss, but as a test.
Before we dive into today's story, we'd love your support. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your engagement helps us create more inspiring stories just for you. Now, without further ado, let's get started.
The desert heat in Scottsdale, Arizona, was relentless, casting a shimmering haze over the rows of luxury cars in the lot of Heritage Motors, one of the region's most prestigious dealerships. Malcolm Carter parked his unassuming SUV in a corner spot, far from the sleek sports cars gleaming in the sunlight. As he stepped out, the dry air seemed to stick to his skin, a sharp contrast to the cool, polished world awaiting him inside. Dressed in a grey hoodie that had seen better days, paired with jeans and scuffed sneakers, Malcolm cut a figure far removed from the clientele usually seen at Heritage Motors. But that was exactly the point. As the dealership's new owner, Malcolm had decided to visit undercover to get an unfiltered look at how the business operated. Pushing open the glass doors, Malcolm was immediately greeted by a rush of cold, conditioned air and the rich scent of leather polish and fresh wax. The showroom was immaculate, its pristine white floors reflecting the rows of high-end cars under perfectly positioned spotlights. Each vehicle was a masterpiece, their glossy finishes capturing and refracting the light, turning the room into a gallery of wealth and status. A cluster of employees near the reception desk glanced up as Malcolm entered. Their conversation faltered briefly, and their eyes swept over his casual outfit. The flickers of judgment were subtle but unmistakable. Malcolm caught a hint of surprise, perhaps even disapproval, in their gazes before they returned to their discussion. From the corner of the room, Heather Dawson approached. She was the dealership's manager, a tall, impeccably dressed woman in her mid-40s. Heather carried herself with the confident efficiency of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Her tailored blazer was spotless, her polished heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached. Her expression was professional, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of skepticism as she scanned Malcolm from head to toe. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice cool and measured. "Welcome to Heritage Motors. How can I assist you today?" Malcolm offered a polite smile, his tone casual. "Just looking around," he said, gesturing toward the rows of cars. Heather's lips curved into a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course," she replied. "We specialize in high-end vehicles here. Many of them require pre-qualification for purchase. Are you looking for anything in particular?" The subtext of her words wasn't lost on Malcolm. She was polite, yes, but there was an unmistakable edge of doubt in her tone. He remained calm, his smile unwavering. "Something like that," he said lightly. Heather's sharp gaze lingered on him for a moment before she nodded curtly. "Well, feel free to look around. Let me know if you need assistance," she said before stepping back, keeping him in her peripheral vision as though expecting him to touch something he shouldn't. As Malcolm wandered deeper into the showroom, he could feel the weight of her assumptions hanging in the air. It was exactly what he had come to see. Malcolm strolled casually through the gleaming rows of luxury cars, his fingers occasionally brushing against the polished surfaces. The glossy exteriors reflected his face as he admired the craftsmanship, but it wasn't long before Heather Dawson reappeared. Her heels clicked sharply on the tiled floor, announcing her approach like a warning bell. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone polite but clipped. "I understand you're looking around, but I'd like to provide you with some options that might be more practical." Malcolm turned to face her, raising an eyebrow, but keeping his expression neutral. "More practical?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. Heather hesitated for a fraction of a second, but her practiced smile didn't falter. "Yes, well, these vehicles are high-performance machines, and they do come with a significant price tag. I'd be happy to show you some of our pre-owned models. Reliable, economical, and still excellent choices." Her words were wrapped in professionalism, but the undertone was clear. She didn't believe Malcolm belonged among the six-figure luxury cars surrounding them. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, studying her with quiet curiosity. "That's thoughtful of you," he said, his tone even. "But I'm not sure I'm ready to settle for practical just yet. I'm still considering my options." Heather's smile tightened, and for a moment her mask of composure slipped. "Of course," she said, reaching for the clipboard she held. "Let me get a list of vehicles for you. I think you'll find these are more suited to your situation." The pause before the word situation hung in the air, as if it carried more weight than she intended. Malcolm didn't flinch, but a flicker of irritation sparked within him. He tucked his hands into his pockets, masking his growing frustration with an air of relaxed detachment. Heather returned moments later, handing him a sheet of paper with a selection of used cars. The list featured older models, all priced well below the starting point of the luxury vehicles on the showroom floor. She handed it to him with a practiced smile, though her eyes betrayed a hint of impatience. "These are excellent options," she said. "Reliable, affordable, and great for everyday use." Malcolm glanced at the list, his lips twitching in faint amusement. A used sedan, an older SUV, a compact hybrid. He folded the paper neatly and slipped it into his pocket without a word. "Appreciate the effort," he said, his tone steady. Heather hesitated, as if unsure how to respond to his lack of enthusiasm. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she said finally, her tone softening slightly. "We pride ourselves on matching customers with the right vehicles for their needs." Malcolm's eyes met hers, calm yet unyielding. "And you've decided these are my needs?" he asked. Heather opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Malcolm let the silence linger, a quiet tension building between them. Finally, he broke the stalemate with a faint smile. "Well," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket, "maybe I should talk to someone who knows my situation a little better. How about the dealership owner?" Heather blinked, her composure visibly shaken for the first time. "The owner," she repeated, her voice tinged with confusion. "I'm afraid that's not possible. The owner doesn't usually handle customer inquiries directly." Malcolm scrolled through his contacts as if he hadn't heard her. "I'm sure they'll make an exception," he said casually, lifting the phone to his ear. Heather stood frozen, watching him in disbelief. Around them, a few employees had stopped what they were doing, their attention drawn to the unexpected turn of events. Malcolm spoke briefly into the phone, his tone calm and matter-of-fact. "They'll be here shortly," he said, slipping the phone back into his pocket and glancing at Heather. "I think this conversation is about to get a lot more interesting." Heather's confidence visibly faltered as Malcolm's words sank in. The tension in the room was almost tangible, the weight of unspoken assumptions pressing down on everyone present. Heather Dawson stood awkwardly in the middle of the showroom, her clipboard held tightly against her chest like a shield. The once polished confidence that defined her demeanor now seemed to crack under the weight of uncertainty. Employees whispered to one another from behind counters and around cars, their curious glances bouncing between her and Malcolm. Malcolm, on the other hand, remained calm and composed, leaning casually against a sleek luxury coupe. His eyes roamed the room with a quiet amusement that only added to Heather's discomfort. The sound of the glass doors opening echoed through the space, breaking the tense silence. A sharply dressed man in a tailored navy suit entered, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. His presence immediately commanded attention. "Malcolm Carter!" the man called out warmly, his face lighting up with a smile as he extended his hand. "Jonathan Pierce," Malcolm replied with an easy grin, shaking the man's hand firmly. "Good to see you." Jonathan's arrival sent a ripple through the room. The staff collectively stiffened, their whispers growing quieter. Heather, however, looked visibly shaken. Her eyes darted between Malcolm and Jonathan, confusion etched across her face. Jonathan turned to Heather, his expression professional but noticeably cooler. "Ms. Dawson," he said evenly, "I see you've already had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Carter." Heather blinked, her mouth opening slightly as though searching for words. "Mr. Carter?" she echoed, her voice uncertain. "Yes," Jonathan said, his tone sharp now. "Mr. Malcolm Carter is the new owner of this dealership. As of last month, Heritage Motors is under his leadership." The words hit Heather like a freight train. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her grip, and her face turned a shade paler. "The new owner?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Malcolm finally straightened from his casual stance, his smile faint but firm. "That's right," he said calmly. "And I thought it'd be interesting to stop by and see how things are running without any formal introductions." Heather's composure crumbled further as the realization sank in. I didn't realize," she began, her voice shaking. "I mean, I thought—" "You thought I didn't belong here," Malcolm interrupted, his tone even but carrying an unmistakable weight. "That I couldn't possibly afford to be a customer, let alone the owner." Heather opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence in the room was deafening. Malcolm took a slow step toward her, his voice soft yet commanding. "I came here today dressed like this because I wanted to see how your team treats people who don't fit the usual mold. I wanted to know what kind of experience a regular customer would have walking through those doors." He glanced around the room, his gaze sweeping over the employees who now stood frozen in place. "And what I've seen so far is disappointing," he continued. "It's not just about me. It's about anyone who walks in here not looking the way you expect them to look. That's a problem." Heather swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she clutched the clipboard tighter. "Mr. Carter," she began again, her voice barely audible. "I had no idea—" "That's the point," Malcolm interrupted, his voice steady. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." Jonathan, standing to the side, cleared his throat. "Malcolm, I can assure you this is not the standard we strive for at Heritage Motors. This situation is an exception." Malcolm held up a hand, silencing him. "Let's not sugarcoat things, Jonathan. This is a reflection of the culture here, and it's my responsibility to change that." He turned back to Heather, his expression softening slightly. "Heather," he said, his tone more measured now, "I don't think you're a bad person. But today, you made some assumptions that could have cost this dealership a valuable customer, or worse, its reputation." Heather's face flushed, and she looked down at the floor. "You're right," she admitted, her voice thick with regret. "I made a mistake, and I'm so sorry. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and that's not who I want to be." Malcolm nodded, his expression unreadable. "Apology accepted," he said after a pause. but an apology alone isn't enough. We need to do better, starting today." He stepped back, addressing the room now. "Jonathan, gather the staff in the conference room. We're going to have a conversation about how things are run around here." Jonathan nodded briskly. "Understood." Heather lingered for a moment, looking at Malcolm as if searching for any sign of forgiveness. He met her gaze steadily, then turned away, walking toward the conference room with purpose. The employees followed hesitantly, the weight of what had just transpired pressing heavily on their shoulders. Malcolm's stride was steady as he prepared for the next step in his mission, not just to manage a dealership, but to change its culture for the better. The conference room at Heritage Motors was sleek and modern, designed to impress clients with its glass walls, chrome fixtures, and minimalist furnishings. But today, it felt stifling. The air was thick with tension as the employees filed in, their movements slow and tentative. Malcolm Carter stood at the head of the long table, his hands resting lightly on its polished surface. His calm, composed demeanor radiated authority, and his gaze swept over the room, landing momentarily on each person. Heather Dawson sat near the back, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. Her usual confidence had been replaced with an uneasy stillness. Jonathan Pierce stood by the door, his arms crossed, observing silently as the team settled into their seats. The faint hum of the air conditioning was the only sound until Malcolm cleared his throat, commanding everyone's attention. "Thank you all for joining me on short notice," Malcolm began, his voice steady but firm. "For those of you who don't know, my name is Malcolm Carter. As of last month, I'm the new owner of Heritage Motors." A ripple of surprise spread through the room. Some employees exchanged nervous glances, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Heather lowered her gaze, avoiding Malcolm's eyes. "I came here today dressed casually," Malcolm continued, "because I wanted to see how this dealership operates when no one knows who I am. I wanted to experience what a potential customer might feel walking through these doors." He paused, letting the words settle over the room. "What I experienced was disappointing," he said, his tone carrying the weight of his words. "I was judged, not for my interest in the vehicles, not for my potential as a customer, but for how I looked." Heather's cheeks flushed as she sank lower in her chair. Malcolm's eyes flicked to her briefly before moving back to the group. "This isn't just about me," he continued. "It's about every person who walks through those doors. Every customer, regardless of their appearance, background, or circumstances, deserves to be treated with respect." A younger sales associate hesitantly raised his hand. Malcolm nodded, inviting him to speak. "Mr. Carter," the associate began nervously, "I think most of us try to treat customers fairly, but sometimes it's hard not to make assumptions." Malcolm's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. "I understand," he said. "We all have biases, whether we realize it or not. But it's not enough to try to treat people fairly. We have to actively challenge those biases. We have to create an environment where everyone feels welcome and respected." He let the words sink in before continuing. "This dealership has built a reputation for excellence, but excellence isn't just about the cars we sell. It's about the experience we provide. From now on, that experience will be built on respect, inclusivity, and fairness." The room was silent, the weight of Malcolm's message pressing on everyone present. His gaze landed on Heather, who sat frozen in her seat. "Heather," Malcolm said gently but firmly, "I want to give you the opportunity to speak. Is there anything you'd like to say?" All eyes turned to her. Heather hesitated, her voice barely audible when she finally spoke. I made a mistake," she admitted, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I misjudged you, and for that, I'm truly sorry. It's not the kind of person I want to be, and it's not the example I want to set." Malcolm nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for acknowledging that," he said. "Apologies are a good start. But they're not enough on their own. Change requires action, and it starts with accountability. Turning back to the group, Malcolm continued. Moving forward, we'll be implementing new training programs to ensure that this dealership represents the values I believe in. Every customer deserves to be treated with dignity, no exceptions. We'll focus on building a culture that prioritizes respect and fairness at every level. Jonathan, still standing near the door, nodded in agreement. We'll work on scheduling those sessions right away, Malcolm, he said. Malcolm's gaze swept the room once more. If anyone has an issue with these changes, now's the time to speak up, he said. The room was silent, the quiet stretching long enough to make everyone acutely aware of its weight. When no one spoke, Malcolm nodded, satisfied. Good, he said. Change isn't always easy, but it's necessary, and this dealership is going to lead by example. As the meeting concluded, the tension in the room began to ease, replaced by a sense of purpose. Employees murmured quietly as they filed out, their expressions a mixture of relief and determination. Heather lingered near the door, hesitating before approaching Malcolm. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice low and uncertain, thank you for giving me a chance to do better. I won't let you down. Malcolm studied her for a moment before responding, his tone steady. I hope you mean that, Heather. Actions speak louder than words, but I believe people can change if they're willing to try. Heather nodded, her eyes earnest. I am, she said simply. Malcolm watched her leave before turning to Jonathan. Let's make sure everyone understands what's expected moving forward, he said. Jonathan grinned, his respect for Malcolm evident. You've got it, boss. As Malcolm Carter stepped back into the bright, polished showroom, the sunlight streaming through the glass walls seemed to glint off the cars with a renewed brilliance. He took a slow breath, letting the stillness of the moment settle. This wasn't just about running a dealership. It was about creating a space where every person who walked through the doors felt valued and respected, where assumptions and biases were replaced by understanding and fairness. The day had been challenging, but Malcolm knew change was rarely easy. He reflected on the uncomfortable truths uncovered during his visit and the culture he was determined to reshape. Heritage Motors had the potential to be more than just a luxury car dealership. It could become a standard-bearer for inclusivity, respect, and excellence. Heather Dawson approached him hesitantly, her usual confident demeanor replaced with genuine humility. Mr. Carter, she began softly, her hands clasped nervously in front of her, I want to thank you for calling me out, for giving me the chance to do better. I promise I won't take it for granted. Malcolm met her gaze, his expression steady but kind. Heather, change starts with accountability, he said. You've taken the first step. Now it's up to you to show through your actions that you're committed to doing better. She nodded earnestly before retreating, leaving Malcolm to look out over the showroom. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he thought of the work ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, but for the first time that day, he felt truly optimistic.